Michael Bruce Ross's life was a stark contrast between a seemingly normal American upbringing and the horrific crimes that would later define him. His early years gave little indication of the depravity that would consume him. Michael Bruce Ross was born on October 7, 1959, in Putnam, Connecticut, to Owen and Elizabeth Ross. His father, Owen Ross, was a mathematics teacher at a local high school, and his mother, Elizabeth, was a homemaker. He was the middle child, with two older sisters, Patricia and Betty. By all accounts, his early childhood was uneventful and generally happy. The Ross family was a typical middle-class family. They lived in a comfortable home in Jewett City, Connecticut, and seemed to maintain a stable and supportive environment. Neighbors and acquaintances described the family as quiet and reserved, but not indicative of any significant dysfunction. He was involved in typical childhood activities, playing Little League Baseball and joining the Boy Scouts. There were no major behavioral problems reported or remembered during his formative years. He wasn't a troublemaker. He followed the rules, did his homework, and generally stayed out of trouble. However, even in his youth, there were hints of a darker side, though easily dismissed at the time as simply peculiarities. He was known to be fascinated by death and violence. He collected articles and clippings about infamous crimes, a hobby that seemed unusual for a young boy. He also showed an intense interest in Nazi Germany and the Holocaust, a fascination that verged on obsession. Other children may have been interested in planes or sports, but Michael spent a lot of time reading about and even drawing mass casualty events. As he entered adolescence, Michael became increasingly withdrawn and isolated. He continued to perform well in school, but his social life dwindled. He grew taller and lankier, self-conscious about his appearance. He began to spend more and more time alone, retreating into his own world. His relationships with his sisters remained cordial but distant. He struggled to connect with them on a deeper level, often feeling misunderstood. His father, a man of logic and reason, found it difficult to relate to Michael's introspective and sometimes morbid interests. His mother, although caring, didn't seem to notice, or perhaps chose to ignore, the increasing darkness in her son's personality. High school was a challenging period for Michael. He remained socially isolated and struggled with feelings of inadequacy and loneliness. He did hold a job at a local store but maintained a pattern of isolating himself. He lacked a girlfriend and felt like an outsider. He continued to excel academically, earning a scholarship to Cornell University. Upon arriving at Cornell, he initially flourished in the academic environment. He found intellectual stimulation and enjoyed the relative anonymity of a large university. He continued to pursue his interest in history and science, immersing himself in his studies. However, the underlying issues that plagued him in high school soon resurfaced. He remained socially isolated and struggled to form meaningful relationships. He found it difficult to connect with his peers, feeling increasingly alienated and misunderstood. This isolation, combined with his pre-existing fascination with violence and death, created a dangerous cocktail. It was at Cornell that the first clear signs of his disturbing behavior began to emerge. He was suspected of a string of burglaries in dormitories and off-campus apartments, but he was never charged. Witnesses reported seeing him lurking around female dorms, exhibiting a predatory demeanor. There were whisperings about his strange behavior and unsettling interests, but these were largely dismissed as college eccentricities. In 1981, while still a student at Cornell, he committed his first known crime. He kidnapped, raped, and murdered Tammy Williams, a 19-year-old student from a nearby college. He buried her body in a shallow grave and returned to Cornell as if nothing had happened. He displayed a chilling composure, showing no signs of guilt or remorse. This crime would remain unsolved for years, a haunting testament to his ability to blend in and conceal his dark secrets. The following years saw a horrific escalation of his crimes. Over the next 3 years, he murdered 7 more women in Connecticut, each killing more brutal and callous than the last. He targeted young, vulnerable women, using his intelligence and charm to lure them into his trap. It's a disturbing trajectory, a seemingly normal childhood masking a deep and troubling darkness. The early signs of his fascination with violence and death while seemingly innocuous at the time, offer a chilling glimpse into the mind of a future serial killer. The combination of isolation, social inadequacy, and an unhealthy obsession with brutality created a breeding ground for the unspeakable acts that would eventually consume him and permanently stain his name in the annals of criminal history. The normal facade of Michael Bruce Ross served only to mask the monster lurking beneath, a monster that would eventually erupt with devastating consequences. The murders committed by Ross occurred between 1981 and 1984. His victims were all young women and girls. May 1981. Paula Pereira, 16. Ross abducted Pereira from Griswold, Connecticut, while she was walking home. He sexually assaulted and strangled her, leaving her body in a wooded area. June 1982. Wendy Barabalt, 17. Ross abducted Barabalt in Canterbury, Connecticut, as she was walking home from a store. He raped and strangled her, leaving her body in a wooded area. July 1982. Deborah Smith Taylor, 23. Taylor was abducted from a hotel parking lot in Griswold, Connecticut. Her body was found in a wooded area where she had been raped and strangled. December 1983. April Bernays, 14. Bernays was abducted while hitchhiking in Lisbon, Connecticut. Her body was found in a wooded area where she had been sexually assaulted and strangled. April 1984. Leslie Shelley, 14. Shelley was abducted while walking home from school in Griswold, Connecticut. Her body was found in a wooded area where she had been sexually assaulted and strangled. May 1984. Robin Stavinsky, 19. Stavinsky was abducted while hitchhiking in Jewett City, Connecticut. Her body was found in a wooded area where she had been sexually assaulted and strangled. May 1984. Lorian Cochran, 29. Cochran was abducted walking to work in Sprague, Connecticut. She was sexually assaulted and strangled. Her body was placed in a wooded area. The murders caused widespread panic and fear in eastern Connecticut. Law enforcement agencies struggled to connect the cases initially due to the victims being abducted from different towns and the lack of forensic evidence at the time. However, investigators noticed the similarities in the killings: young women and girls abducted, sexually assaulted, and strangled in wooded areas. The break in the case came in May 1984, shortly after the murders of Leslie Shelley and Robin Stavinsky. Investigators received a tip about a man matching Ross's description being seen near the areas where the girls were last seen. They also learned that Ross had a history of deviant sexual behavior and had been treated for exhibitionism. Ross was brought in for questioning, and after hours of interrogation, he confessed to all 8 murders. He even led investigators to the locations where he had buried the bodies of some of the victims. Ross pleaded guilty to the murders to avoid the possibility of facing the death penalty. At the time, Connecticut law made it difficult to obtain a death sentence. However, the prosecution successfully argued that Ross should be executed due to the heinous nature of his crimes and the fact that he had meticulously planned and executed the murders. In 1987, Ross was sentenced to death for the murders of Paula Pereira, Wendy Barabalt, Deborah Smith Taylor, April Bernays, Leslie Shelley, Robin Stavinsky, and Lorian Cochran. What followed was a series of legal appeals spanning more than 2 decades. Ross's attorneys argued that he was mentally ill and that his confession was coerced. They also challenged the constitutionality of the death penalty in Connecticut. In 2005, Ross unexpectedly changed his stance and asked his lawyers to stop all appeals. He stated that he no longer wanted to live on death row and that he was ready to accept his punishment. This decision sparked a new wave of legal challenges, as his lawyers and other advocates argued that his decision was not rational and that he was still suffering from the effects of his mental illness. Michael Bruce Ross was executed by lethal injection on May 13, 2005, at the Northern Correctional Institution in Somers, Connecticut. He was the first person to be executed in Connecticut since 1960. His execution was met with mixed reactions. Supporters of the death penalty hailed it as justice for the victims and their families. Opponents argued that it was a barbaric act and that it did not bring closure to the victims' families. A court-appointed psychiatrist examined Ross and concluded that he was competent to make his own decisions. The court ultimately agreed, and Ross's request to halt his appeals was granted.